The smell of dust and desperation filled the air as Clara Sanders stood at the edge of the auction crowd, clutching her little sister's hand so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Wyoming Territory, 1878, a place where fortunes could be made and lives could be broken in the same breath. Today, the auctioneer's voice rang out like thunder over the gathered townsfolk of Redemption Creek, announcing the foreclosure sale of the last thing Clara had left in this world, her family's farm. Next up, the Sanders property, 40 acres with a standing structure, opening bid at $50. The auctioneer bellowed, his mustache quivering with each syllable. Clara bit her lip until she tasted blood. 3 months after her father's death from typhoid, and here she was, 20 years old with a 10-year-old sister to care for and not a penny to her name. The bank had been merciless despite her pleas for more time. $50. Do I hear 60? The auctioneer continued, scanning the crowd. 60. Called a voice Clara knew all too well: Everett Walsh, the cattle baron who had been trying to absorb every small farm in the county into his sprawling empire. 70, someone else shouted. Clara watched in horror as the bids climbed higher and higher, each number hammering another nail into the coffin of her hopes. $80, 90, 100. Her father had built that farm from nothing, had died working that land. She remembered his hands, calloused and strong, teaching her how to plant, how to harvest. Now it would all belong to someone else. $200, Walsh called, a smug smile crossing his face as he glanced in Clara's direction. The crowd fell silent. No one else would bid against Walsh. He was too powerful, controlled too many of the town's interests. 200 going once. The auctioneer began. Something broke inside Clara than the dam holding back 3 months of grief, fear, and exhaustion. A sob escaped her throat, then another, until she was weeping openly, her shoulders shaking with the force of it. Her sister pressed against her skirts, frightened. Laughter rippled through the crowd, cruel, dismissive laughter at the spectacle of her despair. "Look at that," someone snickered. "Crying won't buy back your land, girl. Maybe she should have worked harder instead of shedding tears," another voice called. Walsh himself joined in with a chuckle. "Women," he said, shaking his head, "too emotional for business." Clara wanted to disappear, to sink into the ground beneath her feet. But then a movement caught her eye. A tall figure broke from the edge of the crowd and strode toward her. He wore trail-worn clothes, a dust-covered hat pulled low, and a week's worth of stubble on his jaw. She'd noticed him when he'd ridden into town earlier that morning, a stranger with keen eyes and broad shoulders. Without a word, he removed his long duster coat and placed it gently around her shoulders, shielding her from the prying eyes of the crowd. The coat smelled of leather, horse, and pine, the scent of the open trail. "That's enough," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an edge that silenced the laughter immediately. "Show some respect." The auctioneer cleared his throat nervously. "As I was saying, 200 going twice." 300, the stranger said, his eyes never leaving Clara's tear-streaked face. Walsh's head snapped around. "What did you say, cowboy?" $300, the stranger repeated, louder this time. "For the Sanders farm." Clara stared up at him in disbelief. Why would this man, this complete stranger, intervene on her behalf? $350, Walsh countered, his face darkening with anger. 400, the stranger shot back without hesitation. The crowd murmured in excitement. This was becoming the most interesting auction Redemption Creek had seen in years. Walsh's face grew red. $500, and that's final. I don't know who you think you are, stranger, but you're meddling in matters that don't concern you. The stranger finally turned to face Walsh. "The name's Jackson Northcott, and I've got $600 that says it does concern me." The bid was outrageous, far more than the property was worth. Walsh opened his mouth to counter, then closed it, calculating something behind his eyes. Finally, he waved a dismissive hand. "Have it your way. You've overpaid by half. 600 going once, going twice, sold to the gentleman in the hat," the auctioneer announced, banging his gavel with finality. Clara looked up at Jackson Northcott, still wrapped in his coat that was much too large for her frame. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do that?" His eyes, the color of a summer storm, met hers. "Because no one deserves to be laughed at while their world falls apart." He paused, then added more softly, "And because I know what it's like to lose everything." Later that evening, after settling her sister Rose with a bowl of stew at the town's only hotel, Clara found Jackson at the saloon, nursing a whiskey in the corner. She'd returned his coat, carefully folded, and approached his table with her heart hammering against her ribs. "Mr. Northcott," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I've come to discuss terms." He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. "Terms for buying back my farm. I won't be a charity case. I can work, I'm strong, and I know the land better than anyone. I can pay you back with interest if you'll give me time." Jackson gestured to the chair across from him. "Miss Sanders, I didn't buy your farm to own it." "Then why?" she asked, lowering herself carefully into the seat. "Because I needed someplace to stop for a while." He took a sip of his whiskey. "I've been riding for 3 years, never staying anywhere longer than a few weeks. I'm tired." He studied her face. "I have a proposal. I'll put the deed in your name. In exchange, you let me work the land alongside you for the growing season. I could use some roots, even temporary ones." Clara's eyes widened. "But you paid $600. Money comes and goes. Some things are worth more." He looked down at his glass. "I've been drifting since the war, seen too much, done too much. Maybe helping someone else hold onto what matters might. I don't know, balance the scales a bit." "Were you a soldier?" Clara asked softly. "Union cavalry. Saw action at Antietam and Gettysburg before a Confederate bullet found my shoulder." He rotated his left arm slightly, as if the memory brought physical discomfort. "I was 19 when I joined up. 22 when I came home to find my family farm in Tennessee taken by taxes. Been wandering ever since." Clara saw it then, the same loss she carried, mirrored in his eyes. "I still don't understand why you'd help a stranger. Sometimes the only way to outrun your ghosts is to do something they'd approve of." He finished his whiskey. "Do we have an agreement, Miss Sanders? One season of work, side by side. Come autumn, the farm is yours free and clear, and I'll move on if that's what seems right." Clara extended her hand, a gesture her father had taught her when making business arrangements. "We have an agreement, Mr. Northcott, and please call me Clara." His large hand enveloped hers. "Jackson," he corrected, "or Jack, if you prefer." The next morning, Clara, Rose, and Jackson loaded their meager possessions onto his wagon. The ride to the farm was mostly silent, broken only by Rose's occasional questions about Jackson's horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding named Copper. The farm looked smaller than Clara remembered, the cabin weathered, the fences in disrepair, the fields overgrown, but it was home. As they approached, she noticed fresh bootprints in the mud near the well. Someone had been there recently. "Stay in the wagon," Jackson instructed, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip as he climbed down. He approached the cabin cautiously, and Clara held her breath as he disappeared inside. A moment later, he emerged, his expression grim. "Someone's been staying here," he said. "Left in a hurry when they heard us coming. Probably just travelers," Clara suggested. "It happens sometimes." Jackson didn't look convinced. "Maybe." He helped them unload their things, then spent the remainder of the day repairing the cabin door and reinforcing the shutters. That night, he insisted on sleeping on the porch despite Clara's offer of the barn. "I'll feel better keeping watch," was all he said. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm of hard work and rebuilding. Jackson proved himself tireless, mending fences, clearing fields, and repairing the roof that had leaked since Clara's father fell ill. Clara worked alongside him, matching his pace despite her smaller frame. They often worked in companionable silence, but gradually began sharing stories, careful at first, then with increasing openness. She told him about growing up on the farm, about her mother who died when Rose was born, about her father teaching her everything from animal husbandry to shooting a rifle. He shared tales of his travels across the West, of cattle drives in Texas and gold mining in Colorado, of sleeping under stars and outrunning storms. One evening, as they sat on the porch after Rose had gone to bed, Clara found herself studying Jackson's profile in the fading light. At 35, he was 15 years her senior, but the hardships of his life were etched into his face, making him seem both older and somehow ageless. "You're good with Rose," she observed. "You ever think about having children of your own?" A shadow crossed his face. Once, a lifetime ago. He was quiet for so long that Clara thought he wouldn't elaborate. Then, her name was Elizabeth. We were to be married after the war. She wrote me letters every week until they stopped coming. Influenza took her in '64 while I was still fighting. I'm sorry, Clara whispered. Life rarely gives us what we plan for. He turned to face her. But sometimes it gives us what we need instead. His gaze held hers for a heartbeat too long, and Clara felt a strange, fluttering sensation in her chest. She stood abruptly. I should check on Rose. Inside, she pressed her hands to her burning cheeks. This wasn't part of their arrangement. Jackson would be gone by harvest, moving on as he always did. Allowing herself to feel anything beyond gratitude would only lead to more heartache. But as spring blossomed into summer, Clara found herself increasingly aware of Jackson's presence, the sound of his deep voice as he taught Rose to fish in the creek, the sight of him working shirtless in the fields under the hot sun, the brush of his fingers against hers when they passed tools back and forth. The farm began to thrive under their joint care. They planted corn and wheat, repaired the chicken coop and acquired a small flock, even added 2 milk cows purchased with money Jackson insisted was just sitting in the bank doing nothing useful. The townsfolk of Redemption Creek, initially suspicious of the arrangement, gradually accepted Jackson's presence. Clara noticed the appreciative glances from single women when they ventured into town for supplies and found herself irrationally irritated by them. Only Everett Walsh remained openly hostile, making pointed remarks whenever they crossed paths. Surprised you haven't moved on yet, Northcott, he commented one day outside the general store. Men like you don't usually put down roots. Men like me, Jackson asked mildly, drifters. War veterans with shadows following them. Walsh's smile was unpleasant. I make it my business to know who comes into my town. Funny, I thought it was everybody's town, Jackson replied, loading supplies into their wagon. Everything worthwhile in this valley will be mine eventually, Walsh said, his gaze shifting to Clara. One way or another, Jackson stepped between them. We should be getting back, daylight's burning. On the ride home, Clara noticed Jackson's tense posture. Walsh is all talk, she assured him. He's been making threats since my father turned down his first offer for our land 5 years ago. Men like Walsh don't stop at talk when they want something badly enough, Jackson said grimly. I've seen his kind before. That night, Clara awoke to the smell of smoke. She bolted upright, immediately alert. Rose, she called, rushing to her sister's bed. Wake up! Through the window, she could see flames licking at the edge of their wheat field, spreading rapidly in the dry summer air. Outside, she heard Jackson shouting. Stay inside, Clara instructed Rose, grabbing her father's old shotgun before running outside. Jackson was already at the field, desperately digging a firebreak with a shovel. Clara ran to the well, filling buckets as fast as she could to douse the flames nearest the cabin. For an hour, they fought the fire together, until finally the last embers died under their relentless assault. The wheat field was a blackened ruin, but they had saved the cabin and the corn. Jackson's face was streaked with soot, his expression murderous as he examined something on the ground. Coal oil, he said, holding up a broken bottle. This was deliberate. Walsh, Clara whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Had to be, he wants to drive us off the land. Jackson straightened, wincing slightly. I'm going into town. Not tonight, Clara said firmly, noticing the angry red burn on his forearm. You're hurt, and confronting Walsh in the dark won't solve anything. She took his arm gently. Let me tend to this first. Inside, Rose had already lit the lamps and was waiting wide-eyed as Clara cleaned and bandaged Jackson's burn. His skin felt hot under her fingers, and not just from the injury. When she finished, his hand caught hers. Clara, he said, his voice rough, I should have been more vigilant. If anything had happened to you or Rose. But it didn't, she interrupted. We're fine, we saved most of the crops. She squeezed his hand. We'll rebuild together. Something shifted in his eyes, then a decision being made. Before she could react, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, but sparked something inside Clara that blazed hotter than any fire. When they pulled apart, they were both breathless. I'm sorry, he began, but Clara silenced him with another kiss, more urgent this time. When Rose cleared her throat pointedly from the corner, they separated, both flushed with more than just the heat of the fire. "You should get some sleep," Jackson said, reluctantly releasing Clara's hand. "I'll keep watch tonight," Clara nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. As she tucked Rose back into bed, her sister whispered, "Is Jackson going to stay now, for good?" "I don't know," Clara answered honestly. "Let's just take one day at a time." But as she lay in her own bed, Clara couldn't help but imagine a future with Jackson by her side, not just for a season, but for a lifetime. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. The next morning, Jackson rode into town alone despite Clara's protests. He returned mid-afternoon, his expression unreadable. "Did you confront Walsh?" Clara asked, meeting him at the barn. "I did. He denied everything, of course." Jackson began unsaddling Copper, "But I made it clear that if anything else happens to this farm or to you, there will be consequences." "That could be dangerous," Clara said, concerned. "Walsh has influence, so do I." Jackson pulled a folded paper from his saddlebag. "I sent some telegrams, called in some favors. Turns out Walsh has enemies in high places, people who'd be very interested to learn about his business practices. This is a copy of a letter that's being sent to the territorial governor if anything happens to us." Clara stared at him. "You've done this before, haven't you? Stood up to men like him." "I told you I've been wandering for years. Didn't say what I was doing while I wandered." He secured Copper in his stall. "After the war, I worked as a Pinkerton agent for a while, learned how powerful men think, how they operate. You're full of surprises, Jackson Northcott," Clara said, a slow smile spreading across her face. He stepped closer, his hands coming to rest lightly on her waist. "I'm hoping that's a good thing." Their second kiss was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Jackson tensed, positioning himself in front of Clara as 3 riders came into view. To Clara's surprise, it was Sheriff Miller accompanied by 2 deputies. The sheriff dismounted, looking uncomfortable. "Miss Sanders, Mr. Northcott," he began, "I'm afraid I have some unpleasant business. Mr. Walsh has filed a complaint alleging that you threatened him, Northcott. He's demanding your arrest." Jackson's face hardened. "That's convenient timing, considering someone tried to burn us out last night," the sheriff frowned. "I hadn't heard about any fire. We were too busy saving our home to ride into town and file a report," Clara said acidly. "Sheriff, this is clearly retaliation for Jackson confronting Walsh about the arson." "Maybe so," the sheriff conceded, "but a threat is a threat, and Walsh has witnesses who claim you said you'd put a bullet in him if he came near the farm again." "That's not what I said," Jackson replied evenly. "I said if any harm came to this farm or its inhabitants, he would answer for it. That's not a threat, it's a promise of justice." Sheriff Miller sighed. "Look, I don't want trouble. Walsh is pushing for an arrest, but I'm willing to let this cool down if you two keep a low profile for a while." "Meaning what exactly?" Clara demanded. "Meaning stay away from town for a few weeks, and Northcott maybe consider moving on once harvest is done. Walsh has a long memory and a lot of friends." After the sheriff and his deputies rode away, Clara turned to Jackson, fear clutching at her heart. "This isn't right. Walsh burns our field and you're the one being warned off. It's how the world works sometimes," Jackson said, his voice tinged with resignation. "Men with money make the rules. So we just give up, let him win." Clara's hands clenched into fists. "No, I refuse. This is my home, our home. I'm not letting Walsh or anyone else drive us away." Jackson's expression softened as he registered her words. "Our home," he repeated. "Is that what you want, Clara, for me to stay beyond the harvest?" Clara took a deep breath. "I want you to stay because you want to, not because you feel obligated. I want you to stay because we mean something to you." "They do." He cupped her face gently. "More than I can say, but I need you to understand what that means. Walsh won't stop. Men like him never do. If I stay, the conflict will only escalate. Then we face it together," Clara said firmly. "I'm not afraid." Jackson's smile was bittersweet. "That's what worries me." Over the next few weeks, they worked tirelessly to prepare for the harvest, repairing the damage from the fire and watching vigilantly for any signs of further sabotage. Jackson insisted on teaching Clara and even Rose more advanced shooting skills, and they took turns keeping watch at night. Despite the tension, or perhaps because of it, Clara and Jackson grew closer. Their stolen moments of tenderness, a kiss in the fields, hands held under the table at dinner, whispered conversations after Rose was asleep, became Clara's anchors in the storm of uncertainty. One evening, as they sat by the creek watching the sunset, Jackson turned to Clara with uncharacteristic nervousness. "I've been thinking about the future," he began. Clara's heart quickened. "Have you?" "Yes." He took her hand. "I know our arrangement was for one season, but I find myself unable to imagine riding away come autumn." "Then don't," Clara said simply. "It's not that simple." He stroked her palm with his thumb. "I have a past, Clara, enemies, mistakes I've made. Staying in one place makes a man an easier target." "Or it gives him something worth fighting for," she countered. "Something worth protecting." Jackson's eyes searched hers. "Are you sure that's what you want? A life with a man who brings complications?" Clara laughed softly. "Jackson, my life was complicated long before you rode into it. At least with you, the complications come with someone to share them." She leaned closer. "I love you. I think I have since the moment you put your coat around my shoulders at that auction." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. "I love you too, Clara Sanders. More than I thought possible." Their kiss sealed a promise that needed no further words. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of horses, many horses approaching the farm. Jackson was already up, rifle in hand, peering through the window. "Walsh," he said grimly, "and at least 10 men with him." Clara grabbed her shotgun. "Rose, stay inside and bar the door behind us." Together they stepped onto the porch, weapons ready but not raised. Everett Walsh sat atop his black stallion surrounded by armed ranch hands. His smile was cold. "Northcott, Miss Sanders." "Beautiful morning for a visit, isn't it?" "State your business and move on, Walsh," Jackson said evenly. "You're trespassing." "Am I? I thought I might inspect my new property." Walsh produced a document from his coat. "You see, there's been some confusion about the deed to this land. The bank seems to have made an error in the auction." "That's impossible," Clara snapped. "The farm was sold fair and square." "Was it?" Walsh's smile widened. "The paperwork says otherwise. According to this, the auction was invalid because your father's debt was calculated incorrectly. The property reverts to bank ownership, and I've just purchased it legally this morning." Jackson's face darkened. "You're lying." "Am I? Sheriff Miller has already reviewed the documents. He's waiting in town to oversee your peaceful evacuation." Walsh gestured expansively. "Of course, I'm not unreasonable. Miss Sanders, if you were to reconsider my previous offers of employment at my ranch, personal employment, I might be persuaded to allow your continued residence in a small portion of the property." The implication was unmistakable. Clara's finger tightened on the trigger of her shotgun. "I'd rather burn this place to the ground myself than accept any offer from you," she said through clenched teeth. Walsh shrugged. "As you wish. You have until sundown to vacate. After that, my men will remove you by whatever means necessary." He turned his horse. "Oh, and Northcott, that intimidating background of yours, not as impressive as you might think. I have two friends who remember a certain incident in Denver 3 years ago, friends who might be interested in reopening that investigation." As Walsh and his men rode away, Clara turned to Jackson, whose face had gone pale. "What is he talking about? What happened in Denver?" Jackson's jaw tightened. "A man died. I was involved. It was self-defense, but complicated. There was no trial, but there were questions. And Walsh knows about this. He must have contacts I wasn't aware of." Jackson rubbed his face. "Clara, I'm sorry. This is exactly what I was afraid of, my past causing problems." "No," Clara said firmly. "This is Walsh causing problems, and we're going to solve them." She thought for a moment. "The deed, the real deed. Where is it?" "In my saddlebag." "Why?" "Because we need to prove Walsh is lying. We need to get to the county seat in Cheyenne where the records are kept." Jackson shook his head. "Cheyenne is 2 days' ride, and Walsh said we have until sundown. Besides, he's probably already bribed someone to alter the records." Clara smiled grimly. "Then we need leverage, something Walsh wants more than this farm." "Like what?" "Information." Clara's eyes gleamed with sudden inspiration. "Mr. Peterson at the telegraph office. He mentioned once that Walsh receives private telegrams from someone in the territorial capital. Said they always made Walsh nervous. You think Walsh is involved in something illegal?" I think a man that desperate to own every piece of land in the valley has a reason. And I think Mr. Peterson might be persuaded to share what he knows about those telegrams." Jackson's expression shifted from despair to cautious hope. "It's dangerous if Walsh catches wind of what we're doing. More dangerous than losing everything, than letting him win." Clara squeezed his hand. "I told you before, I'm not afraid when we're together." They formulated a plan quickly. Jackson would ride to town immediately to speak with Peterson, while Clara and Rose prepared for possible trouble. If Walsh's men returned early, Clara would fire 3 shots into the air as a warning. As Jackson saddled Copper, Clara pressed the deed into his hand. "Come back to me," she whispered. "No matter what." His kiss was fierce, a promise. Always. The hours of Jackson's absence stretched endlessly. Clara kept Rose occupied with chores while maintaining a vigilant watch. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising a summer storm. Just as the first raindrops began to fall, Clara spotted riders approaching not from the direction of town, but from the hills behind the farm. Her heart sank as she recognized Walsh leading 4 men. They must have circled around to approach from the rear. Clara rushed inside, grabbing her shotgun and extra ammunition. "Rose, hide in the root cellar. Don't come out until I call for you or Jackson does." "But Clara, no arguments. Go now." Clara hugged her sister fiercely, then secured the trapdoor once Rose was safely below. Stepping onto the back porch, Clara leveled her shotgun at the approaching riders. "That's far enough, Walsh." Walsh reined in his horse, smiling through the increasing rain. "Miss Sanders, I see your protector isn't around. Wise of him to cut his losses. He'll be back." "And you're still trespassing." Walsh dismounted, seemingly unconcerned by the weapon aimed at his chest. "I did warn you what would happen if you refused my generous offer." He nodded to his men. "Search the house, find the girl, she'll make useful leverage." Clara fired a warning shot into the air, then quickly aimed back at Walsh. "The next one won't miss. Leave now while you still can." Walsh's smile faded. "You're outnumbered and outgunned, Miss Sanders. Be reasonable." "Reasonable left town when you tried to burn us out," Clara replied, firing 2 more shots into the air, the signal for Jackson. "And I'm through being intimidated by men like you." Walsh's face darkened with anger. "Take her," he ordered his men. What happened next was a blur of motion and sound. 2 of Walsh's men rushed the porch while Clara fired, catching one in the shoulder. The other tackled her, sending the shotgun clattering across the boards. Clara fought viciously, kicking and scratching, but the man was twice her size. A gunshot cracked through the air, and the man pinning Clara suddenly went slack. She shoved him away to see Jackson dismounting from Copper at a full gallop, his revolver smoking. "Get away from her," he roared, advancing on the remaining ranch hands, who quickly backed toward their horses. Only Walsh held his ground, drawing his own pistol. "You're making a mistake, Northcott. I have the law on my side." "No, you don't." Jackson's voice was deadly calm as he helped Clara to her feet. "I just came from the telegraph office." "Interesting messages you've been receiving from the territorial surveyor's office. Something about a planned railroad route through this valley. Something you've been keeping very quiet while buying up land for pennies on the dollar." Walsh's face drained of color. "That's a lie, is it?" "Because the territorial governor might be interested to know how you came by that information before it was made public. Insider trading is a serious offense, Walsh, as is attempted murder and fraud." Thunder cracked overhead as rain poured down on the standoff. Walsh's men looked increasingly uneasy. "Here's what's going to happen," Jackson continued. "You're going to leave this farm and never return. You're going to withdraw any false claims about the deed, and you're going to stay away from Clara and Rose permanently. In exchange, I won't send copies of those telegrams to every newspaper from here to Denver." For a tense moment, Walsh seemed to be considering his options. Then, slowly, he holstered his weapon. "This isn't over, Northcott. For your sake, it had better be." Jackson kept his revolver trained on Walsh as the men collected their wounded comrade and rode away into the storm. The moment they were out of sight, Clara collapsed against Jackson, adrenaline draining from her body. "Rose," she gasped. "Root cellar." Together they retrieved a frightened but unharmed Rose, and Jackson barred the doors while Clara tended to a cut on her cheek from the struggle. "I was so afraid you wouldn't make it back in time," Clara admitted as they huddled by the fireplace, the storm raging outside. "I heard your signal shots," Jackson said, holding her close. "Rode like the devil was on my heels." He kissed her forehead. "You were incredible, standing up to Walsh like that. I meant what I said. I'm through being intimidated." She looked up at him. "Do you think it's really over?" "Not entirely. Men like Walsh don't give up easily, but we've bought time and protection. Those telegrams are real. Peterson showed them to me. Walsh has been using inside information to acquire land along the proposed railroad route. Once that becomes public knowledge, he'll have bigger problems than us." Clara was quiet for a moment, watching Rose doze by the fire. "So what happens now, with us?" Jackson took a deep breath. "Well, I had planned to do this differently, but—" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple ring. "I bought this in town today. I was going to wait for a peaceful moment, but I'm realizing those might be rare in our life together." His eyes met hers, vulnerable and hopeful. "Clara Sanders, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Clara's heart soared as tears of joy filled her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "1,000 times yes." The kiss they shared was a promise of protection, of partnership, of a love forged in adversity and strengthened by shared purpose. Autumn came to the farm with a bountiful harvest despite the earlier fire. The wheat fields would take another year to recover fully, but the corn crop was abundant enough to see them through winter with plenty to sell. The news of Walsh's speculation scheme had indeed become public, forcing him to address legal challenges rather than personal vendettas. On a crisp October day, with leaves turning gold and red on the surrounding hills, Clara Sanders became Clara Northcott in a simple ceremony attended by Rose and a few trusted neighbors. The bride wore her mother's dress, lovingly altered, and carried wildflowers gathered from the fields she had fought so hard to keep. That evening, as they sat on the porch of their home, truly their home now, Jackson pulled Clara close. "Do you remember the first day we met?" he asked. "At the auction," Clara nodded. "I was crying and everyone was laughing, and I put my coat around you." He smiled at the memory. "I had no idea then that I was wrapping myself around the rest of my life." Clara rested her head on his shoulder, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of promise. "Sometimes the things we lose lead us to what we're meant to find." "And sometimes," Jackson added softly, "a gesture of kindness becomes the foundation of a future neither person could have imagined alone." In the distance, Rose called them in for supper, her voice carrying across the fields that would sustain generations of Northcotts to come. Hand in hand, they rose to answer, stepping forward together into the home they had defended, the life they had chosen, and the love they had earned one brave action at a time.